let's say you own the decision, you make the plunge, you get married, and then the storms come. The conflict, the fighting, this, that. A lot of people can be obviously shell shocked because they're like, oh, wait a minute. I thought we'd be living the theology of the body, and then the experience, just the cross that marriage is.
Yeah.
What would you say, just concrete tips, how do you resolve conflict with a spouse in a marriage? For people who maybe haven't had a lot of conflict resolution skills, my wife and I actually went to a marriage retreat this past week. It was like a marriage workshop you do online virtually, and they're given different conflict resolution skills. And we're going through this workbook, and they say, okay, one of the first points that you need to know when you're going through conflict resolution is let go of objective reality. And I did, what any reasonable husband would do on the Zoom call. I laughed out loud. Now, thankfully, I was muted, so nobody heard the laughter. But in my brain, it's like, wait a minute, what? Like, you're going through an argument, and the first thing you need to do is let go of objective reality. And I'm like, no. Like, objective reality is the point, so that you can convince the other of your facts. That way, it's productive, like a presidential debate, right? Where you can say what you're thinking, and you'll absorb the other person's viewpoint.
Not true. Not true.
Yeah. So, but it was just like, okay, wait a minute. I haven't thought about this, that, okay, I need to let go of objective reality. If she's saying, you always, you never, you did this for 12 hours. And I'm like, oh, nope, it was 8.5 hours. And it's not always, because there was that exception. You get so hung up on fact checking that you're not listening. All you're doing is formulating a rebuttal while they're speaking.
Right.
And this isn't listening, this is debating. And it doesn't work. So what would you say in terms of like, okay, practical tips, conflict resolution, husband and wife, they love each other, but they're not seeing eye to eye. How do they work through those things to create more light than heat?
Yeah, I think once again, like in the committed relationship of marriage, you have made a lifelong promise to not only one another, but to God, right? That in good times and in bad, you would love one another. And so here we are, right? Here's that line in those vows. These are bad times, or this is a bad moment, or this is a rough patch in your marriage. In the experience that I've had being a counselor in the past, what was very obvious to me, being a third party looking into this very heated situation between a husband and a wife, was that beyond all the emotions, behind all of the conflict, there was just very simple needs that were not being met. Very simple needs, right? It's not like, well, I need $1 million and I need it's nothing like superficial. It came down to very basic needs, like, I want to feel like I'm being heard. I want to feel like you are proactively doing things that remind me that you love me. Just basic stuff, fundamental stuff. I want to know that I am loved. In the heart of every man and woman, there is this desire. They also say that, for husbands, there is this universal desire to know that they are respected. For the woman, it's this universal desire to know that she's cherished. It can be both for both genders, but those are kind of these universal desires. And so behind every conflict, there's actually a very basic need. So going into these moments, guns blazing, you're a blank, you're a this, this is not ideal. Just like the presidential debates, it's not conducive communication. I think most people will agree on either platform, either party. In a married relationship, you ride or you die together. There's no winner and loser. You're either both winners or you're both losers. Okay. And so that having been said, if you are a team, then you better find out real quick how to be a team, even when there is conflict. And so a very practical idea, Jason, is, say a husband or a wife has, a complaint, an issue, a hurt, something on their heart that's bothering them. Rather than going in there saying, you're a worthless piece of, or you always do this, you're criticizing. You can just start. Simple template to use is, hey, do you have a minute to chat? You sit down, right? Make sure you have each other's attention, TV's off, whatever. Hey, when you did blank, or when you said blank, it made me feel blank, right? This is an easy to use template. When, for example, hey, when you made that comment about my family, it made me feel hurt. I was offended. Okay. Notice something. You're just objectively, I don't know what that marriage Zoom thing you were on was about, but you are objectively identifying like the action or the statement or the inaction that is causing you to feel the way you do. And you're not blaming them for it. Like you're not criticizing them or getting down on them, harping on them. It's just when you said this or when this happened, it made me feel negatively, right? And this is a, a less aggressive way of just bringing your feelings to the table, huh? This is how I feel because this is what happened. And granted, there might be some defensiveness, there might be some misunderstanding or some more description that needs to happen to really help the other party understand. But you're not doing it in a way where you're trying to undercut the other person, chop them down, or like, call them names or this sort of thing. There's a couple in the world of psychology, Dr. John and Julie Gottman, his wife, and they are the foremost experts on marriage. They have, over the past number of decades, been able to determine with over 90% accuracy the couples that they mate who will have a successful marriage and who will end up in divorce. Over 90% effective rate just by videotaping them and showing the interactions of how they respond to one another in the counseling session. But they talk about the 4 deadly horsemen. In the book of Revelation, there are the 4 deadly horsemen who come with the apocalypse. But in marriage, they describe the 4 deadly horsemen, and they are criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. Let me say that again. It's criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. Criticism is, just like I was showing you the example of, you are a worthless piece of, you always do this, you're only capable of this, blah, 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 right? Criticism. What is defensiveness? I never do that. I don't do anything wrong. This is you, like you're doing it, right? So in criticism, you're blasting another person for, your discontent. Defensiveness, you're not taking any sort of accountability. You're just kind of evading or putting it back on them. Stonewalling, what is that? Stonewalling is this. One spouse is coming at them. Hey, when you said this, it made me feel like this. Put that wall up. Wakanda forever. You have that energy field. I don't hear you anymore. I am detaching myself from reality in this conversation, right? It's like stonewalling, very unhelpful to resolving the conflict at hand. And then the worst horseman that they identified is contempt. That's when an attitude of contempt has entered into the relationship where there is a general lack of respect now that has poisoned the interaction. This is very, very dangerous, where once that respect is gone, it's only a matter of time now till the whole thing comes crashing down. And so, according to the Gottmans, it's really important that every couple identifies in their interactions with one another, what are the deadly horsemen that maybe I fall victim to? Maybe I have a tendency to criticize. Maybe I have a tendency to be really defensive when someone's coming to me with a genuine complaint. Maybe I stonewall because I can't handle the conflict. Or maybe I just have this looming contempt for my significant other. These are all very, very dangerous things, and they have to be checked at the door. Otherwise, it will lead to an unhealthy situation in a marriage. And so I think even these tips of identifying what's there, being able to, once again, bring up your feelings, learning how to, in a very safe way. I mean, I hate to use the term, but kind of like a safe space, huh? Because ultimately, the couple, when there's a conflict, it's a very simple need that's not being met, as I said before. If they can learn how to communicate that need without criticizing, being defensive, stonewalling, and being holding contempt for one another, the better off they're going to be in resolving it. And what I have found, thanks be to God, and I'm a young blood, I've only been married 7 years now, but every time my wife and I have had a real conflict, or maybe there was a real problem that came up in our marriage, the irony, the beautiful irony, is that once we were able to talk it out, to be able to hear one another, respectfully understand why the person had a problem to begin with, or, we heard one another. So both of us felt like the other person was respectful, understanding what our complaint was. guess what? From that very difficult moment, we were able to then grow in intimacy in our marriage. And we're not just talking physical, we're talking on a whole different level of like, now I know you even better than I did before. I know that this sets you off. I know why it sets you off. I know that it sets you off because this happened to you in the past. And now I want to be sensitive to you, my bride, because this sort of behavior is very, very damaging to you, or even unbeknownst to me, maybe something that it really bothers you. Well, guess what? We're a team, right? Ride or die. Either two winners or two losers. So I want to identify why this is an issue for you. I want to listen to that. And I want to be able so we can work together, truly know one another, right? As the Bible says, a husband knew his wife, a wife knew her husband. This is not just a physical concept. It's all encompassing. We're like, now I'm really becoming an expert. I'm not an expert yet, but I am learning how to become an expert at marriage because, conflicts, they don't make anyone special. It's not a sign that somehow your marriage is in trouble because you have conflict. That just means you're human. So fear not. Fear not, all married couples out there. If you are in a season of fighting, this doesn't make you special. This doesn't mean that your marriage is doomed. However, if a couple is repeatedly unable to learn how to resolve this conflict in a healthy way, avoiding the 4 deadly horsemen of marriage, then it's going to go south very quick. And so it's very important for married couples. If you're running into a rough patch and you're not, as a couple, able to overcome this, there's no harm and foul in talking to your pastor and calling up a marriage counselor, saying, you know what, honey, this isn't an F on our report card. It just means that we need a professional opinion to help us get through this time. Okay, there's no harm and foul in that. Also, in the heat of the moment, sometimes that's not the best time to have this conversation. Know when to, in the 80s, Top Gun was such a great movie. You revisit it now and it's like, it's just it's very cheesy, but epic nonetheless. It's part of our childhood. But, you hit the eject button, eject, the plane is in a jet wash, it's spinning, it's about to crash, hit the eject, right? So if either you or your spouse has gotten to a point in the conflict resolution conversation where at this point, it's not getting anywhere, it's getting heated, it's turning into the presidential debate, hit the eject button, say, honey, let's take a quick break. Let's take a breather and come back to this, okay? I feel like if we continue right now, we're going to say or do something that we're going to regret. Because 10 times out of 10, people usually say and do things that they regret when their emotions are flooded, right? They feel angry, they feel unheard, and it's just very unhealthy, right? Learn how to step away when you sense the temperature rising too high. My wife's pretty good at that. I gave her permission to do that, and in the moment, it really annoys me when she wants to eject. But, I'm usually grateful in the long run when she does that because it means we didn't escalate to somewhere else where we shouldn't have, right? But to be able to learn how to grow in love, even through those moments of conflict. Once again, it doesn't make you special. Every couple on earth has conflicts, has arguments, has bad days, has things that set them off. But it's the couples who really learn how to mature in love and communication and to become experts really in marriage. They learn how to take the difficult situation and to communicate through it so that they can grow in intimacy. And so what was once the stumbling block now becomes the stepping stone to even greater and more authentic love. So don't be afraid of it, but just learn how to grow through it.
Yeah. So, and I love what you're saying that, don't try to figure it out on your own. I mean, get the marriage counseling, and even if your spouse won't go, that shouldn't stop you from going to marital counseling. I mean, it'd be great if they could come along. It'd be a heck of a lot more helpful, but if they won't, you still deserve that. Because some of you may be thinking, hey, the 4 horsemen, our marriage is a barn. It's a stable. Those horses live here. I mean, they're going, there's manure all over the living room. I mean, they're taking up residence. So, I mean, that's when you want to get some help in there because, I mean, Chris and I are very open. We go to marriage counseling because it's hard. It's really difficult. But the insights that you can get from sometimes someone looking in the outside are priceless. I mean, just the marriage workshop we went to this last weekend. I mean, I remember one line someone said during the workshop is that at every point in a marriage, you have to grieve what you're not getting in that relationship. And it hit me like a ton of bricks of just like, wow, it reminds me of like a priest I know that went through a period of authentic grieving in his priesthood that he wouldn't become a husband and a father. And it was so healthy to be able to process that angst instead of letting it boil up into you to the point where it ruptures. And I think in a lot of marriages, I've heard the anecdote that in marriages, a lot of times the woman is dissatisfied because her husband won't change, and he's unhappy because she changed. But in every marriage, there comes a point where you feel like I'm not getting something I want. And a lot of people think, oh, well, it must be because I married the wrong person, because if I only married her over there, then I'd be getting everything I want. Instead of learning on the front end of like, no, the grieving process has to happen because marriage is not an idol. And you can't expect the person to fill every need. And if you could just come to grips with it's going to be disappointing at times. And granted, there are situations where it isn't a matter of grieving what you're not getting. I mean, maybe there's abuse, there's infidelity, there's serious red flags that it might even be an invalid marriage. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about even in the valid sacramental marriages that are just tough. There's going to come a point you're going to need to grieve. Maybe this guy wasn't all 147 things on my list that I dreamed of when I was 16 years old. And I promise God that if I behave, he'll give me a perfect spouse. You know, he wants to mature us, I think, through that time of suffering.